Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce webinar, Sustainable Transport in Ireland. I'm your moderator today. I'm Mary Honohan, Council Member of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce and a tax partner at PwC. And I'm delighted to moderate today's webinar, Sustainable Transport in Ireland. We have three very interesting speakers. Two are from companies leading the way to more sustainable mobility and transport infrastructure. And the third is a significant user of Rosslare Europort. As we all know, decarbonisation of the transport sector worldwide is a big job involving changes in lifestyle for all of us, which is not easy. We have heard things like less air travel, car sharing, walking and cycling. And some of these are not very practical, but under the Irish Government Climate Action Plan, the transport sector must reduce its emissions by 50% to 6 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030 and to net zero by 2050. We will not achieve this just by using carbon-friendly fuels and vehicles. The transport infrastructure itself will need to emit less CO2, in fact, much less CO2. So with that backdrop, I will now introduce our three Chamber member companies who will share their thoughts and experiences from their different perspectives. And the format this morning is that we have a panel, three on our panel, as you will have seen from our invitation. We'll have questions and answers at the end, but feel free to put your questions in the chat as you think about them as we go along, and we'll try to deal with them towards the end. So our first panel expert is Dr. Michael Haddad, Innovation and Partnerships Director at Alstom in France. So Dr. Haddad is a seasoned innovation professional with over 25 years of experience across multiple industries, including healthcare, defence and telecommunications. With a PhD in physics and an MBA, at Alstom, Dr. Haddad is responsible for driving growth and innovation by developing the company's 5 to 10 year innovation roadmap and leading foresight activities. Alstom is leading the way to greener and smarter mobility, striving to provide stakeholders with the most efficient and digital mobility systems, while further improving the environmental friendliness of their solutions. Alstom has been in Ireland for a long time. They've been here for nearly 25 years and have provided all 81 trams on the Lewis network. Alstom currently is building the new DART rolling stock for Irish Rail, which includes a fleet of both electric-powered and battery-powered trains, helping Irish Rail to meet its public sector target of a 51% reduction in emissions by 2030. Alstom is also building the charging infrastructure for the new battery trains and supplying the latest signalling technology on the Drogheda to Greystones line, as well as updating signalling systems on the Cork area regional commuter network. So turning to our second panel expert, we have Steve Preece, Chief Executive for Egis Group Ireland. Egis is a leading global consulting, construction engineering and operating firm with operations in 100 countries and a global workforce of 18,000. Egis has been in Ireland for a long time, almost 30 years, and it is the company's largest independent operator of infrastructure. The Egis team operates almost 470 kilometres of Ireland's motorways, as well as the Dublin Port Tunnel, the Jack Lynch Tunnel in Cork, and the Limerick Tunnel. In 2013, Egis expanded its footprint here by acquiring leading engineering consultancy, JB Barry, bringing the group's Irish headcount to almost 600. The Allied operation now offers clients full end-to-end service from upstream design and engineering consultancy through project commissioning and overseeing construction to asset management and operations. Egis is active in the design and delivery of transport infrastructure, including intercity, light rail, bus, active travel cycle and greenways all over Ireland. And our final panel expert is Chris Smyth, Group CEO of Perennial Freight, which is based in Rosslare, and Chris is also Vice President of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce. Perennial Freight is one of the largest Irish-owned transport companies. It operates ro-ro, low-low, temperature-controlled business and groupage services to all over Europe. In 2014, Perennial Freight will ship over 50,000 full loads in and out of Ireland. Perennial Freight has been at the forefront of the development of new services and joint ventures with European partners post-Brexit. It has met head-on the challenges of delivering essential goods in lockdowns at the height of COVID. In 2022, Chris and his team had to deal with the sudden impact of spiraling fuel prices during the invasion of Ukraine and how to mitigate the cost to its clients. Chris tells me that the freight industry is always the first to see the start and end of a recession. It is a great barometer to measure and soundboard what is happening in the European economy. After Brexit, COVID and Ukraine, sustainable transport is now a priority for everyone involved in logistics. I hope you will agree that we have three very interesting speakers on our panel today who are at the coalface of all of these changes and developments that we all need to embrace. As I said, we'll take questions at the end, but feel free to put your questions in the chat as you think about them. So now we have our first question for Steve. Steve, it's clear we have a lot to do to reduce carbon emissions, and we're seeing significant government investment in sustainable transport in Ireland, to the tune of 35 billion in capital investment up to 2030. As an organisation involved in transport systems, engineering and operations globally, maybe you could outline where we can effectively decarbonise while improving systems.
Sure. Thank you, Marion. Thank you for the introduction. Just one point to highlight, or actually, we purchased the acquisition of JB Barrie in 2023, not 2013. That was.
Did I say 2030? Sorry about that.
I was just thinking, maybe I did. Maybe I started thinking about that in 2013. But just if anyone picks it up,
thank you for the
we apologise now. But it was actually last year when we decided to make the acquisition of JB Barrie. So let's get to the main point for today. As it's already been highlighted, the government have set an action plan of 23, and that's to halve emissions by 2030. Right now, transport contributes to 17.7, nearly 18% of Ireland's emissions overall. So it's important we address that, but it's a difficult sector to address in terms of reduction. And hopefully, out of this hour, we will discover why. The strategy applied globally and playing out here includes improving public transport systems, the efficiency. And that's where we really need to look at on Ireland as a whole, is that we want to reduce our emissions, if we want people to not take their cars, we've got to look at how do we move the public around. So we've got to encourage behaviour change. And that is actually one of the key points. How do we change behaviour? So lessening the requirement to travel daily, in particular by car, which we in turn is encouraging a model shift. And I'm sure people have actually witnessed now that traffic appears to be more condensed than 2019 before COVID. And, our population's not growing that much since 2019. But our traffic use, it really has expanded. And one of the reasons that is that after COVID, people are no longer car sharing as much. We're now taking our individual cars by ourselves. And we've actually lost that piece of pooling cars, sharing cars. And again, it's all to do with behaviour. So following from that, the latter piece involves initiatives like living streets, 15-minute towns, refocusing urban planning. We've got to really go back to basics here. Town centres to prioritise commercial, cultural, health and learning facilities. How do we get them all to work together that people can get to them without having to take the car? Accessible on foot and public transport. We're seeing the Greenways initiative now being put out there. There's a commitment of 3.6 billion to be spent over the next 10 years. So the government are notifying this, they are recognising this is what we need to do. We're involved, so we're involved in living streets, planning for areas like Dunleary, Dundrum. They've already started that. You've probably seen the latest greenway being done in Dundrum. So at Egis, we understand how effective transport systems are essentially for the economic and social development for societies in the face of population growth and increased urbanization. But it is possible while we're doing this to reduce carbon emissions, and it's all to do, say, is behavior change. So the role of engineering, our role really is, in many ways, is solving the fundamental paradox of sustainable growth. So it's the future.
And Chris, you mentioned greenways. That to my mind, leisure comes into my head. And would you distinguish between a greenway and would you think of greenway as a leisure?
That's to Steve, I'd imagine, is it?
Sorry, Steve. I meant sorry, Chris. Go back to Steve. Steve, I was a question. Steve.
That's okay. That's okay. It's got to be where we're encouraging people where you may have to take, your journey is 100%. We only really want you to use your car for 20% of that 100%. The other 80% should be done on, hopefully, by public transport or by walking or by using, I'm going to sound very much like Minister Ryan here, using a push bike. But, we will talk about it later, but we're seeing a shift where we're looking at designing a new motorway road, which will have a cycle lane beside it, a 100-kilometer cycle lane. That's unheard of before. We've never dreamed of we're going to build a motorway, we'll put a cycle lane in the vicinity. But we're starting to look at how other countries operate, like in the Netherlands, etc., and hopefully start adapting those pieces into here. And I know people will say it always rains here in Ireland. Well, believe it or not, it doesn't actually rain that much. There was a study done about traveling to work, does it rain? And it only rains around 10-15% of the times between 8 and 10 o'clock traveling to work. So majority of times when people travel to work, it's actually dry. So there's that concept to think of.
That's good. That's good to know. Thank you, Steve. My question is for Michael at Alstom. Michael, where are your challenges regarding sustainability?
Yes, so maybe Steve, I said quite a lot on usage and behavior. I will focus on the technology side of sustainability. So first, of course, it's about reducing CO2 emissions, and for that we need to invest in R&D, because one way is behavioral change, but also decarbonization of energy, for instance, is also a way to achieve the decarbonization of the transport sector. And doing so, you need to adapt existing trains in order to build battery trains, hydrogen trains. So it's quite a lot of investment. And it's again something that we don't know if our customer will buy it, because it has an extra cost. If we've been using diesel for quite some times, it's just because it's very efficient in terms of energy density and cost. So who will pay for this extra cost and this R&D, which is still an open questions? Then energy efficiency, because the best energy is the one that you have not used. So how do we improve our vehicles? Not easy, because we've been working on, the trains are there for something like more than a century. So part of the system, such as of the vehicle, such as aerodynamics, there is not much to do to improve. So it's all about mass reduction, for instance. But mass reduction, we know that it doesn't work for light vehicles, because you want comfort, you want HVAC, you want a lot of gadgets in your car, and you want the same in your train. So and you want also safety. So you just add up functions, and thus you put more mass, and then you impact the energy efficiency. So again, it's a tricky point. We would love to be able to change some materials, but then you touch a second part of sustainability, which is recyclability. For instance, if you want to shift from steel to aluminum, it's possible. Then from aluminum to lighter materials, such as composites, then you have an issue with recyclability. And at Alstom, the target is to be 100% recyclable in some trains. For instance, the new high-speed train in France will be 97 recyclable. There are materials that you can't use. Plus regulation. In a train, you have a lot of people, so you have a fire and smoke regulation, for instance. So again, it prevents you from using some materials that would be key to be lighter, for instance, but it takes a lot of time to develop them for a railway application. And as we are a low volume industry, many suppliers, they just don't want to make the effort to build materials just for us. So sometimes we have to pick up things that were designed for the automotive industry. For instance, in our hydrogen train, we had to take hydrogen tanks that were first designed for the automotive sector. And you have also very new expensive semiconductors, such as silicon carbide, which provide more electricity conversion. You have a lot of new technologies that we have to invest in order to be more sustainable. And last but not least, we are not only talking about CO2 emission, we want to be a zero emission mode of transport, meaning that it's also about sound, vibration, and also particles, because in some cases, especially for metro application, when we are braking, we are emitting particles. So it's really about thinking about everything we could do in order to improve sustainability, and not that easy.
Well, that's really interesting, Michael. And I think I, in some respects, envy you being at the coalface of all this innovation.
I have a lot on the plate.
Yes. I'd like to bring Chris in now. Chris, you told me that 90% of the world's freight moves by sea. What are the shipping lines doing to reduce their emissions? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Well, shipping accounts for 2.5% of global greenhouse gases, and the IMO, which is the International Maritime Organization, have set a target for greenhouse gas reduction of 40% by 2030 and 50% by 2050. Alternative fuel technologies, they are in the process of being deployed, but these technologies probably not sufficiently mature yet to currently replace diesel engines as a power source for most ships. Most ships would work on what they call, HVO, heavy fuel oil. And if you look at the fleet on the Irish Sea, particularly, most of the vessels on the Irish Sea will be between 20 and 30 years old. So to decarbonize those ships significantly will take a lot of investment, and it's a big challenge to get that done by 2030. We do see ferry companies, that are changing their fleet, particularly Brittany Ferries and CLDN. They're bringing in new vessels that are, liquefied natural gas, which is LNG, which has a significant environmental advantage over traditional maritime fuels. Funnel emissions are sulfur free, they're virtually particulate free, and about 90% reduction in nitrogen dioxide. If you look at ferry companies like CLDN, are probably one of the most progressive shipping companies. You see them every day in Dublin when you come along there, along the East Wall. They're constantly building new ships, and they are moving away from HVO, heavy fuel oil. And the engines, the next generation will have LNG, and some of the vessels now will have, electric engines, electric propulsion engines inside them, which could give speeds up to 16 and 17 knots, which is fantastic. When you talk to ferry companies and the shipping companies about what are you doing, about sustainability, where are you at getting away from all this heavy fuel, they'll talk about, better route optimization, better monitoring of ship performance and, analytical data. They'll talk about possibly, using a mix of greener fuels. And then the usual one, dry docking, where they, they clean the hulls and they reduce drag. I suppose the fact of the matter is that, shipping lines have a very, very big job to move away from your HVO to start using LNG and electric motors. And that's going to be a challenge for them. And even, when they go to electric, the plan would be that, when a vessel, be it a ro-ro ship or a lo-lo ship or a cruise liner, pulls into a port, it's plugged in, it's recharged, and away it goes. And the electricity for that will be generated by offshore wind. And today, we've loads of wind, which is fantastic, which means we're producing loads and loads of wind and loads of energy, but the ships can't go because of the bad weather. So that's the irony of the situation.
And I think it's difficult to store that, isn't it?
Yeah, there's huge batteries needed.
When there's no wind and the ship can sail.
that's the thing. You've loads of power and you can't go, and that's happened. You know, in the last two storms, a storm the weekend and a storm again today. There's no ships going, no matter what energy, whether it's HVO or LNG or electric, they just are going nowhere. That's just a fact. In the last couple of years, you know, the shipping industry has been hit with, you know, with extra charges. So we have what they call a SECA charge came in 2020, which is a sulfur emission control area. And that was introduced on the Irish Sea and right across Europe. And that was brought in to reduce the sulfur use in the shipping lines. And the shipping companies then have to charge that cost per lane meter to the transport companies, who in turn pass it on to the client. So that's been in place since 2020. So it's the additional cost. And the idea is to incentivize shipping companies to reduce the sulfur they use in their fuel. This year, there's a new charge that's come in. It's called the ETS, and that's the emissions trading system. This is introduced right across Europe by Europe. The shipping companies have to buy credits for the amount of CO2 that they emit, and the cost of that goes straight back to the EU. Right now, in Ireland, any bit of freight moving on a vessel from Ireland to the UK or to direct routes to Europe are paying substantially more now in ferry costs. And right now, it's only 40% this year, 80% in 2025, and 100% in 2026. So if you look at a ferry going from Rosslare to Cherbourg, a trailer or a container or any bit of freight on that today is costing 50 euros extra on an ETS charge. It'll go to 100 next year and 120 in 2026. And that's significant to exporters and importers. So the ferry companies and the transport companies are virtually in this situation, collecting the revenue, collecting the tax to pass on to the EU. So the pressure comes back then from business. Business is saying, well, can you use better ferries that are using cleaner fuel? Maybe they're using LNG as against HVO. They might be using electric. But that's not always possible, because logistically that ship could be in Dublin, but we're shipping from Cork, or vice versa. So it is a challenge for the shipping companies right now, you know, to get away from heavy fuel oil. A lot of ferries and the ships on the Irish Sea and in Europe, they're quite old. And if you go back to COVID, and we saw a lot of cruise liners being chopped up around the world because nobody was going on cruises. Now there's a scramble to build new cruise liners again, because everybody is back traveling. And those cruise liners, you know, will have to get away from, you know, HVO, heavy fuel oil, use better, cleaner energies. So I think, in fairness to the shipping lines, they are genuinely doing their very, very best to be cleaner, to be better. But it is difficult. And going back to the last two speakers, there's a significant cost in doing all this that will have to be passed on to the end user.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yes, I think we got that message, unfortunately, about the cost being passed on. My next question is for Michael. Michael, how do you envisage the decarbonisation of mobility?
A good way to approach, in fact, the decarbonization of mobility, globally speaking, is to, I don't know if you are aware of the Kaya equation. So it's part of the plan that Europe is using. They have a model called Avoid, Shift, Improve. So you could avoid, in fact, moving. So it's maybe first you have to keep in mind that the emission have increased because the population has increased and the GDP has increased. So the more you have people and the more they have money, the more they want to buy stuff, the more they want to move. And this is why the carbon emission of the transport sector is booming. So one way to reduce this emission could be to play on the transport demand. You prevent people from moving. You tell them, okay, you will take the plane 3 times in your life, and that's it. So I guess it will have some social impact. So it's not something that is very easy to do. Another way, it has been said, I think, by Steve, is to play with the modal shift. So it tells people that, okay, you were using a plane, maybe on a national route to 300 kilometers. Now you will use a train. Or okay, if you take your car to do only 2 kilometers, maybe you can use a bicycle. So how do I shift from a heavy, intense with a mode of transport with high carbon footprint to a low carbon footprint mode of transport? Then you have energy efficiency, of course. You reduce the energy that will be spent by your vehicle. Again, I think it has been said by Steve, you could improve the load factor of vehicles, but in the after COVID era, because of course, the more passenger you have in a vehicle, the less you have CO2 impact per passengers. But after COVID, it's not something that is easy. And we've seen that worldwide, car sharing is going down. So I don't know if it's about COVID or safety reasons. If you're a woman traveling alone, maybe you don't want to share your car with someone you don't know. And last but not least is the CO2 intensity of energy. And this one has a cost impact, but not really a social impact. If I can use green energy on my in my plane, car, whatever, then, and if it's at the same cost, then I have the solution that allows me to take whatever mode of transport I want and whenever I want. So that's why I think so much public money is going to hydrogen, synthetic fuels, batteries, just because if we manage to solve this issue of lowering the carbon intensity of energy, then people won't have to change their way of moving. So this is for me the list of the of what we could use.
Very interesting listening to what I was thinking was, could you bring your car on the train? But I don't think that would.
We used to do that in at least in France. Yes, we had
Yeah.
that. You could go on vacation with your car on the train, but I think the service has disappeared something like 20 years ago. I used it when I was young, but now it doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, I see. Okay. I thought you would say that's not a good idea. So, Chris, I'm going to bring you back in. Is Ireland ready to move from freight from road to rail, which we've seen in other countries?
Yeah, it's I suppose, you know, to give you some backdrop, you know, what's going on in Ireland at the moment with rail freight. There's about 13,000 freight movements per year in Ireland. And when I say freight movements, I mean 40-foot containers and 45-foot containers. That's the only rail freight we have in Ireland. There is bulk going by rail as well. But the movement in Ireland in total in freight is about 2 million movements per year. So we've 13,000 versus 2 million. You know, it's about 1%. 10,000 of those freight movements come from Dublin Port across to the west of Ireland over to Ballina, where containers are railed across and then they're picked up by trucks and delivered another 20 or 30 kilometres, some of the companies up there. And there's another 3,000 go from Waterford to Ballina, and the same thing again. So right now, the actual freight in Ireland is very, very low, rail freight, which means obviously you can improve that. You know, any kind of an improvement is great. But for rail freight to be, you know, be viable, you really need to be traveling more than 300 kilometers. Anything less than that is just not viable at all. And you have to remember that with rail freight, there's a truck needed at the start to bring the trailer or the container to the ferry or to the train. And the last mile has to be delivered by a truck again. And this is where it gets very, very expensive. It's always the last mile. In Europe, we see huge freight moving by rail. A lot of it comes from the main ports such as Rotterdam and Zeebrugge. And we use these rail services, and they're absolutely fantastic. You can get to Italy, to Poland, down into France. They're really, really good services. But the overall amount of freight in Europe is probably, rail freight is between 5 and 6%. So that's the overall amount that you kind of get to. There is a point where a truck becomes more viable than rail freight. You know, we see in Europe as well, with most of the rail freight, they're specifically built, the infrastructure is there. The truck and the trailer can drive onto the train. The trailer can be lifted onto the train. A container can be lifted onto a train. We don't have that in Ireland. All we can do in Ireland is lift a container onto a carriage and away it goes. And realistically, Could we put trucks onto rail network here in Ireland? No, because the infrastructure, the tunnels, the time factor, what's the point in putting a truck onto a train in Rosslare to drive to Dublin? You know, it's what, over 120, 130 kilometers. You'd be as quick to do it by truck. So it is going to be a challenge here in Ireland. And I suppose where the rail freight comes in, or where our part in that would be, if you look at what Brittany Ferries are doing in Cherbourg at the moment, and in next year, and it's 2025, where they're putting a line from Cherbourg down to Bayonne in southern France. So what will happen there is there'll be a train each day going from Cherbourg to Bayonne and Bayonne to Cherbourg, and it'll take 42 trailers off the road each way. So traffic coming from Spain, fridges, dry freight, all kinds of goods will come to Bayonne, put onto the train up to Cherbourg, and then Cherbourg into Dublin, and the last mile or two then will be delivered by a truck. So there is a lot of that going on right across Europe. But here in Ireland, we're very, very limited because of the short distances, because of the amount, the fleet we have, the size of the trucks and the size of the trailers we have. So in my opinion, I don't really think there's really any appetite for the transport sector to move freight across to rail because of the distance, because of the investments, and also, because of the different types of units that we all use. So we need to keep investing and improving the roads, really. That's where I see it. I don't see that rail is going to be an alternative for any transport company. It will grow. It could mean if we grow by 2 or 3%, you're only going from 13,000 movements a year to maybe 30,000 movements. That's still very small compared to the 2 million. So for me, to answer your question, I don't think Ireland is ready to move freight from road to rail. And I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, Mary.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Chris. And I suppose what strikes me is that we've a lot to do, and we've only, when I say we, I mean collectively as a nation, as a society, and there's only so much money we have, and road to rail for container traffic does not sound like a good way to spend the budget.
We're an island. We're a small island at that. It just doesn't make sense. So I think bulk, I get the bit about the bulk. I get the bit that maybe more containers could be moved. But when you're comparing it to the amount of volume that we move every day, I just don't think it's, and there is a lot of talk, and I've seen a lot of paperwork on it and a lot of ideas, but all they are, I think, are ideas. I don't think they're going to come to fruition because financially they're just not viable.
Okay, thank you. My next question is going to be for Steve. But before I ask Steve the question, can I ask Michael and Chris to look at the questions that have come in on the chat, because I'm going to turn to a few of those after Steve answers the next question. So Steve, the question is, it would be interesting to get your perspective. As we know, and as we've discussed already, Ireland is still very reliant on roads. Where's the future there in terms of sustainability?
Okay, interesting comments, especially from Chris in relation to how we do move freight on the road network, and we need to continue to improve the road network. Right now, if we look previous 10, 20 years ago, we did a major investment in road networks. We were one of the highest spending countries in Europe, spending development over the region of $1 billion a year on the road network. But if I look right to 2024, there is, you look at the plans. Yes, everyone's on this discussions about Cork Limerick motorway, but we don't have any major plans to do any further major roadwork infrastructure pieces. So that if I look at the government's plan going forward, it really is maintaining the asset with a small addition to the road network. So I actually agree with Chris about how, moving the freight onto trains logistically, anything can be done, but it's the cost and the value of that cost. So one of the concepts really would be, how do we remove the user from the road network, which should then free up a good piece for freight to travel on the road network itself. And the way to do that is there's a major shift model change into the railway. For nearly 30 years, Ireland's not invested in the rail network. Now it is doing. I think there's fair to say, my figures may be wrong on this one, but I think there's 7 billion to be spent on the rail network itself. And, you know, how's that going to look? Well, you know, you look at 10% of the lines at the moment on the Irish rail lines are only electrified. Any other, if I look at our neighbours in France, 80% of the rail network is actually electrified. So I'm going to really talk about, you know, we need to get this piece right to decarbonise the road network. So to get the rail network right, we need to electrify it. We need to apply technology to improve like the signalling systems, ticket systems, ICT. We need to bring greater reliability. And that's another key point. People will use things if they can depend on it. When like if a bus is late or a train is late, that's the thing that sticks in their mind. It's not the journey. It's, God, this is 15 minutes late. I'm not going to use that. It's unreliable. So we need to get reliability into our public network. Cork are building their commuter rail project. I'm pleased to say they're moving ahead. We need to tackle our cities and our larger urban areas, make them more integrated, which includes the light rail and the bus, which we'll mention about Bus Connect in a moment. So the government's plan in light rail, which includes the Dart Plus West, the South, the Coastal, the Lewis extensions. You know, we're from an Egis perspective, we're involved in all these preliminary designs for these extensions. And that's where we think the transformation is going to come, which will affect the communities along those routes. It's making sure we pick the right route to carry the right density of traffic, i.e. footfall passengers. Bus Connect programs planned for all our cities. Yes, it was to encourage greater connectivity. It's reduced by the connecting outlines. We don't want to create, whoever remembers the movie Judge Dredd, these massive cities with big walls, and we all live. And actually, that draws to make comment on the 75-kilometre city that we're building in the Middle East, the long wall, as they're calling it. I dread that, but I know that's what we're going ahead with doing it. We're actually digging the foundations now as I talk. But we have to be careful not to create these nuclear cities cutting off the rest of the country. So to ensure that we allow our small towns to feed, to grow, the bus connects, the light rail pieces, they need to be more developed. We're seeing an important focus on the rural areas, which, you know, I've mentioned before, the cycleways, the 3.6 billion to be invested. And, you know, we're looking at, again, I mentioned this in Europe, Copenhagen, we're seeing how cities can be transformed. You know, we're not the first country to face this issue and to address it. And nor will we be the last. And there are experiences out there that we can take and introduce. But we get back to the famous comment, behavior change is getting people to change their behavior, but they will only change their behavior when we get the infrastructure right for them to use. So
it has to be easy for people.
Correct. Correct. And so, you know, decarbonising the road network, you know, I hate to say this, I know I'm going to get shot in the foot for this. Electric cars is not the answer. I hate to say it, but it's actually not. Especially right now with our energy supply, you know, we still have fossil fuels driving some of our energy to give us our electricity. So while you're charging your car, giving it electric, some, you know, dirty power station supplying you that power. So think of that when you're charging your electric cars. Hybrid. I think that's, you know, I was listening to the CEO for GMC, General Motors, one of the largest productions of cars. They're moving away from electric cars. They're going to focus on hybrid because 90% of journeys are done in less than 50 kilometers. So, you know, charge your car for the 50 kilometers, and then if you need to do a bigger journey, then you convert to the diesel. But it doesn't have to be the diesel fuel. As Chris mentioned, there's different types of fuels now being developed which are carbon efficient. So that's my piece.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Michael, could we get your perspective? What do you think are the main roadblocks to sustainable transport? Why do you think it's so difficult? It's already
Yeah.
difficult, I've heard from Steve, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, both Steve, in fact, and Chris, I've said quite a lot. So maybe coming back to what Chris was saying about freight, especially for Ireland. I mean, there is a question of capacity that if rail is the less carbon intensive mode of transport, unfortunately, and I've been discussing with friends from CMA CGM, for instance, when you have a large container ship that comes at the port, there are 22,000 containers on this ship. So it would means that you need hundreds of trains just to move the containers. So it's something that you could do in the US because they are mainly moving bulk, and maybe the Road and Belt Initiative in China, connecting China to Europe, they could do things and replace trucks by trains. But everywhere else, rail is tough for rail to get into the freight market. Now, coming back to what Steve, I said, I fully agree. It's all about behavioral change. If you take the automotive sector, for instance, and again, we are connected with many large players, and it's someone from Michelin who told me that when you buy a car, you take your most demanding, let's say, mission profile. So if you are a family of 4 and you want to have your car during vacation, then you buy a SUV. Even though 95% of the time you will just commute and do only 40 kilometers in France. I heard 50 kilometers in Ireland to go from your place of work to your home and back. You will buy a large car, not efficient at all. You will be alone in the car because you are used to that. So this has to change. And this will open new opportunities. So new, for instance, battery technologies, such as the sodium batteries, that is not using any critical materials, but you have less energy density. So you will lose in terms of autonomy, but you will gain in terms of cost. Then it has also been said, our cities are organized around the car. Tramways were pushed out of the cities and they grow, they spread. Maybe tomorrow, cities have to change, more vertical. We're talking about the 15-minute cities so that you can walk, ride a bike, and commute with trains instead of taking your car for whatever you have to do. Now, coming back to the railway sector, I think one of the biggest issue is how do we share the green energy? Because we've been talking about HVO, which is the biofuels, about liquid gas, and in the future it will be synthetic fuels, hydrogen, electricity. And I think we have to keep in mind one key aspect. Everything that can be plugged should be plugged. So a car, a train, just because it's more efficient to use an electric motor than to use a combustion engine. Assuming that you will use biofuels and synthetic fuels, these are really scarce resources that you want to save. And these fuels should be dedicated to maritime and aviation. As it's very rare, what you have should go there. So sustainable aviation fuels and maritime fuels. And sometimes I hear that, I don't know, some automotive companies, they want to use synthetic fuels, or we want to put biodiesel in a train. I mean, it's the emission of a train are so low that, okay, keep the diesel and let the HVO for the trucks. Or because at the planet level, it's all about the total emission, not the emission of the railways compared to automotive. So by decarbonizing railway, you just add the carbon to the automotive sector, which is not the way to do. So we are not asking for more investment or R&D into biogas, biodiesel engine for train. It's really about electrification of the railway system. And so this is a big roadblock because there you are facing the strategy of sectors and companies. They want to claim they are green. Doing so, they are just getting resources that would be better used somewhere else, just because they can pay for that. So the social impact, behavior, model shift is a big roadblock, and the right sharing of the green energy among transport sector is also a big part of it. And last one, that is both a solution and a big problem to be solved, is intermodality. Again, it has been said, at some point we have to interconnect all these modes of transport. Brittany Ferries is doing a great job, and we've been discussing with them, and very interesting. But also, how do we connect active mobilities with a commuter, for instance? How do we embed bicycle in a train? There are a lot of open questions where we have to share the passenger information, ticketing, where is my container, and so on. So all about digital and orchestration of mobility.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Very interesting. I have a few panel questions. I'm going to ask the first one to Chris. Chris, I don't know if you can see the question here, but it says, even for an island nation like Ireland, are current military tensions in the Middle East going to significantly impact fuel and transport costs, especially with possible reduced access to the Suez Canal?
Yeah, that's
your thoughts on that one, Chris.
Yeah, well, fuel, it hasn't, diesel and the price of fossil fuel hasn't increased very much in the last 2 or 3 weeks with the problem in the Suez Canal. We saw a little spike last week. We buy fuel in bulk, so we saw a little spike of about 1 or 2 cents, and it's come right back down again. You know, as you probably know, when it comes to fuel, it's really traders. We don't dictate the price. It's a commodity, so it's trading. From a logistics point of view, yes, that's going to be a problem. All of a sudden, these large container ships that Michael was talking about now have to go around a long way, putting a couple of 10 days on their journey. That's burning HVO, LNG. That's expensive. That is costing money. Somebody has to pay for that. So will it continue? I don't know the answer to it. It will certainly slow things down. But I would say, since COVID and Brexit, we've built a lot of warehouses in Ireland and in the UK because of all this. So a lot of companies, logistics, have now scaled up. So there will be a small problem, maybe a lull there with deliveries. There may be an issue with slow product, but I wouldn't get too worried about it. These things in logistics and transport, we normally come up with solutions and we move product very fast, and there's always a backup plan. So I think we'll be okay.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear that, Chris. There's another question here I'm going to put to Steve. What practical initiatives can Irish businesses implement to reduce emissions associated with business travel and employee commuting?
What practical solutions? Gosh, I think we've really touched on.
Do you want me to ask Chris another question while you're thinking about the answer?
I can give maybe some insight on this one, because
okay.
Yeah, Michael, so, I'll hand this over to my esteemed colleague.
So of course, maybe promote public transport, but there are also, I think, very interesting initiative dealing with the company car. So for instance, if you propose people a car, they will ask for the biggest one, because, as I said, they will need the car not only to do their business trips, but also they will use it for vacations and so on. So we've seen initiative where, in fact, companies offer a small car for all the business related activities, and then a budget to rent a car during holidays. So that, in fact, 95% of the time you have a small car and you emit less, and maybe you have no way. I mean, there are no other option than using a car for your work. But then, when you go on vacation with your family, you can use this budget to rent the right car. So this could be, for instance, one way
Michael,
to do it.
that sounds really interesting from a practical CO2 emissions management and all of that. But I don't know what it's like in France, but in Ireland, there's a status around your car. So if you're going to visit a customer, and
I know,
in a
but
tiny
again,
car, the customer may not take you seriously. So,
but again, behavioral change. When we have, a big SUV, we will blame people having big SUV, for instance, or the shame to have a big car. Maybe the mentality will change.
But Michael, but it could be a big SUV as hybrid, going back to what Steve is saying.
Yeah, but the energy efficiency is not that great. And again, because you are in an island, it's not that easy. At some point, you have to take planes, because if you were in continental Europe, there are also other options, including a night train. For instance, we could have night train connecting every major cities in Europe. So instead of taking 3 hours air travel, you would take a 12 hours night train travel. But in Ireland, you are in a very specific position where it's not that easy.
Do we have to rely on the continent reduction rather than the island reduction, given that we're an island? There's a long question at the beginning for all the panelists, and I don't know if my 3 panelists have had time to read it, but does anyone before I choose somebody, does anyone want to jump in with their?
I'll jump in on that, because that was one of the things I was saying on one of the questions, and it's an interesting one about, I think it's to do with home deliveries and about people, just eating at home. And one thing we've seen since COVID and Brexit is the amount of online shopping. It's absolutely exploded in Ireland, which is fantastic. And it goes back to, I suppose, Steve's point about, people, not going out shopping anymore, buying goods at home. We bring a lot of products in from Europe into Ireland. So an example would be, go back to what Michael was saying. We ship goods from Spain to Cherbourg on a train. There's no road miles. We get a ferry from Cherbourg to Dublin. A HGV picks up that full load of online shopping in Dublin Port, brings it to a regional distribution centre somewhere on the M50, and then there's probably 30 small white vans with 100 parcels, goes off and does 100 deliveries each around the city of Dublin. And goes back to the whole, what Michael and Steve are saying, there's behavioural change. Who's the problem there? Is the HGV? Is the HGV the problem? I don't think so, because it's probably doing 10 kilometres on the M50. But 30 white vans leaving a distribution centre in Dublin to go to all the housing estates around Dublin or Cork or wherever, that can't be, that can't be good for the environment. Unless they're electric vans, which I don't think they are. So, and if you also, the other problem is, and we see this from the online shopping, believe it or not, I think in Ireland, 1/3 of all online shopping is returned. So we're buying all this product, comes in, delivers it, gets to the home address, and 1/3 of that is actually returned back out again to somewhere in Europe. So is the buying, getting deliveries to your door sustainable? Is it productive? I don't think it is. Are we better off going back to the supermarket or going back into the shopping centres, getting the train or getting the bus or walking or cycling to the supermarket or to the shopping centre, buying our goods, trying them on and bringing them home then? That's just my comment on that.
Well, that's interesting, Chris, because the retail sector are saying there's been a revival of people wanting to go in town and experience the, look and feel, and now the retail sector, I suppose, to a certain extent would say that. But I was actually delighted to hear that, because I'm a bad online shopper. I'm one of the third that ends up sending the thing back.
But one of the online companies we work for, they tell us, I don't know if this is, how true it is, but Ireland by far has the greatest amount of returns in Europe. So when someone buys a pair of jeans, they buy 2 pair in 2 different sizes, and the one that fits them, then they send the other one back. And this is why there's so much returns going back out. And we would do 20, 30 loads of online shopping a week coming in, and at least 10 are going back with packaging and returns on them.
Very interesting. Chris, Steve, did you want to jump in on that?
Well, this thing jumped to my mind there, like for the companies who are sending out, their items, perhaps we should look at giving them a penalty if things are returned, especially if the, sizes change on people. If people are having to order 2 pairs of jeans to make sure one fits, then do we look at the company who's been making those jeans? If a size is a size 12, it's a size 12. It's a standard fitting. But I don't know, but perhaps it's one piece.
That's another thing altogether, because if you're a man and you're size large, it'll always fit you, whereas the women think, oh, it's a 12, no, I couldn't possibly wear a 12, I'm a 10.
Yeah.
Even though, and that's the manufacturers then are elastic about the sizes.
Yeah, no, I just touch on, there's a flight in the first question about drones, and I'd probably, and this is very close to my heart on the drone program. I'm actually working with Airbus on drone development, on how we move people around in the future. We're creating what we call pop-up drone airports, where you can create a place to where you can go get into a drone and fly from A to B. But to be honest with you, you know, it's quite unique. It's quite specialized. I can't see drones being a major piece. Delivering, etc. That's where I'm going to get to. Do I have my meal dropped in by a drone? And I get back to Chris's comment, like 13 white vans going out. There's got to be a better way of how we distribute the goods. I can see a future for medical supplies being dropped off by drones, like emergencies being driven. But in relation to will the drone be the next form of transport? Not for a very long time. Not for a very long time, to be honest with you.
Well, thank you. We have 5 minutes left, and there is one question here on the chat about the grid infrastructure.
That's good. Yeah, it's a good question. Can we take the grid?
Panelists want to jump in there?
I could, and maybe if I just can add what has been said by Chris and Steve about freight. Don't forget also that maybe rail could be a solution for what we call urban freight. So why don't we use commuters, tramways, metro in, let's say, very early in the morning where you have space and you could move goods from a depot to the center of the city. Something that today operators are not asked to do. So it's not that easy to develop the solution, but it could be a way, because the more you have goods moving all around, the more you have congestions and so on. So even if you decarbonize the vehicles, then you also have congestions. And coming back to your question about energy, I think one of the strength of having a good supply of renewable energy, of course, you have to invest in the grid, but you have to keep in mind that you have a seasonal effect. You produce more energy in summer because of sun farms and wind farms, and you consume less. So you have to store the energy during summer in order to use it during winter. So you have to find ways to store energy during 6 months. And one way to do that is to turn this electricity into hydrogen. So you have the choice of, trying to store or improving the grid, or turning this electricity into hydrogen, store it and use it later on, or maybe develop hydrogen for transport. So I think this is what Ireland should think about, if you are, because I know you have a lot of wind, and this is very efficient to produce electricity. So what about instead of, we are all relying on Spain or Northern Africa, and there's photovoltaic farms to have hydrogen, maybe Ireland could do that with wind.
That's a very good point, Michael, because if we could capture the wind around Ireland, we would have enough energy not only to run Ireland, but over 30% of Europe. That's the opportunity. And we do have, obviously, I think we're all aware of the connector coming from France into Ireland, which is underway. There is actually discussions for a second connector to go in. But we are seeing development. We're seeing the harbours. Rosslare Harbour is redeveloping itself to be able to launch the windmills. So I think there's a real strong, sensible approach at the moment from the country in capturing renewable energy. And I'd get to your point in storaging. That requires further work, and I think that has to be explored further on how we store the energy, especially in summer, as you quite rightly highlighted.
Huge opportunity.
Yeah, I would say just coming on that point as well in relation to electrification of trucks and so forth. And this is where we're heading for. This is what we're talking about. And with all this energy that we can produce in Ireland with wind energy, will it go to electric trucks? But the problem again is an electric truck is about €500,000, versus about €150,000 for a diesel truck. So I think the transport industry would like to go to electrification if there were some subsidies or some incentives there to do it. But right now, again, we'll produce all this energy. We can use the HGVs, but there is no electric HGVs in Ireland. There's one or two around the country that are either used on smaller trips. But I think the point we're going to get back to, we produce all this energy, we need to change the infrastructure and our behavioural change as well, and incentivize people to switch over to alternative fuels, because there is a lag there. People are talking about it and there's little things happening, but we're still a long way away from getting away from fossil fuels in HGVs and in transport. And I'd further go on one of the points we're just talking about, behavioural change. I'll throw in one there. Should there be a fast lane for trucks? Should there be an express lane for trucks on motorways? Why are they sitting there burning diesel? There is for taxis and buses. Well, the freight is what we're all buying. We all want our home shopping. Have a fast lane for trucks in and around the cities. Get them in and get them out as fast as possible. Behavioural change at customers, at delivery points, the RDCs, the big multiples. Don't have its trucks sat there for 4 and 5 hours burning diesel at night either on. Get it in, get it out. Then it gets more productivity. You get more deliveries done, and they're the kind of things we can do simply as well that cuts down on emissions and is better sustainable as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. And it's 11 o'clock now, so we're out of time. So I would just like to thank Steve, Michael, and Chris for a really interesting panel discussion. And I'd like to thank all the audience for their attention. And I look forward to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Mary.
Bye-bye.